Victoria Sterling was worth $400 million, but at this moment, sitting on the dusty shoulder of a highway in rural Texas, she had never felt more helpless. Her red Ferrari 488 sat beside her with its hood open, smoke still rising from the engine like a signal of surrender. She was 3 hours from Dallas. Her phone had no signal, and not a single car had stopped in the 40 minutes she had been stranded. She was wearing a white silk blouse that was now stained with sweat and dust, beige designer pants that would never be the same, and heels that had proven completely useless for walking on gravel. She had her head in her hands, fighting back tears of frustration when she heard a small voice beside her. She looked up to see a little boy, maybe 4 years old, in a striped shirt and jean shorts, standing there with his hands on his hips, looking at her broken car with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. He pointed at the smoking engine and announced that his dad could fix it. His dad could fix anything. Victoria looked around for an adult, for a parent, for anyone who could explain where this child had come from. And then she saw the small house set back from the highway, barely visible behind a row of mesquite trees, and standing in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag, was a man who would change everything she thought she knew about life, love, and what really mattered. If you're ready for this story, type in the comments where you're watching from. Victoria Sterling had built her empire from nothing, and she never let anyone forget it. At 42 years old, she was the founder and CEO of Sterling Cosmetics, a beauty company that had revolutionized the industry with its combination of luxury products and direct-to-consumer marketing. She had been featured on the cover of Forbes twice, had been named one of the most powerful women in business, and owned homes in New York, Miami, and Malibu. She had also been divorced twice, estranged from her only sister, and hadn't taken a real vacation in 7 years. This trip to Texas was supposed to be different. She had told herself that she was driving instead of flying because she wanted to see the country, to experience something authentic, to reconnect with the simple pleasures she had abandoned in her pursuit of success. The truth was that she had just ended a relationship with a man who had been more interested in her money than in her, and she needed to get away from everything and everyone who reminded her of her failures. So she had rented a Ferrari in Houston, telling herself that if she was going to have a breakdown, she might as well do it in style. She had planned to drive through the hill country, maybe stop in some small towns, eat at local restaurants, pretend for a few days that she was someone else, someone whose life wasn't a carefully constructed performance of success and happiness. The car had other plans. The engine light had come on somewhere outside of San Antonio, and she had ignored it because she didn't know what else to do. She was Victoria Sterling. She didn't know anything about cars. She had people for that. She had people for everything. But none of her people were here on this empty stretch of highway, and when the engine started smoking and the car shuddered to a stop, she realized that all her money and power meant absolutely nothing. She had tried calling for help, but her phone showed no bars. She had tried flagging down passing cars, but they either didn't see her or didn't want to stop. She had considered walking, but she was in heels and the nearest town was probably miles away. So she had done the only thing she could do. She had sat down on the gravel shoulder, put her head in her hands and waited for something to change. The little boy appeared like a mirage. His name was Lucas, and he was 4 years old, and he was absolutely certain that his father could fix anything in the world. He had wandered over from the small house behind the mesquite trees because he had heard the car stop and had seen the pretty lady sitting on the ground looking sad, and his mama had always told him that when people were sad, you should try to help them. His father was named Jake Morrison, and he ran a small auto repair shop about 10 miles down the road. Business had been slow lately, which was why they had moved into this smaller house, the one that used to belong to Jake's grandmother, the one that didn't have air conditioning that worked properly and had a roof that leaked when it rained. But Lucas didn't know about any of that. He just knew that his father was the smartest, strongest, most capable person in the whole world, and if anyone could fix the pretty lady's red car, it was him. Jake had seen his son walking toward the highway and had followed, his heart in his throat at the thought of Lucas near traffic. But when he reached the shoulder and saw what had captured his son's attention, he stopped. A red Ferrari. A woman in expensive clothes, the kind of person who probably wouldn't want help from someone like him. But Lucas was already talking to her, already telling her that his dad could fix it, and Jake couldn't very well walk away now. He approached slowly, taking in the situation. The woman looked up at him with eyes that were red from crying and dust, her makeup smeared, her carefully styled hair now limp with sweat. She looked nothing like the wealthy, put-together person she obviously was. She looked lost. She looked human. He told her that he could take a look at the car if she wanted. He owned a repair shop. He worked mostly on trucks and older models, but he knew his way around engines. She might have to wait for parts if it was something serious, but he could at least tell her what was wrong. Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. This man in his worn jeans and grease-stained shirt was the first person who had offered to help her all day, and something about his quiet competence made her want to cry all over again. Jake spent 20 minutes under the hood of the Ferrari, while Victoria sat in the shade of the mesquite trees with Lucas, who had appointed himself her official entertainer. The boy showed her his collection of toy cars, which he carried in his pockets everywhere he went, and explained in great detail the differences between a truck, a race car, and a monster truck. Victoria found herself actually listening, actually engaging, in a way she hadn't done with a child in years. Maybe ever. When Jake finally emerged from under the hood, wiping his hands on his jeans, his expression was serious. He told her that the cooling system had failed, probably a combination of the extreme heat and some underlying issues that should have been caught during routine maintenance. The engine had overheated badly. Some components would need to be replaced, and those parts would have to come from Dallas, maybe even Houston. Victoria felt her stomach drop. She asked how long that would take. Jake hesitated before answering. A few days, he said, maybe a week depending on availability. He could try to rush it, but even then, she was looking at least 3 or 4 days before the car would be drivable again. 3 or 4 days. Victoria thought about her schedule, her meetings, her responsibilities. She had calls tomorrow, a board meeting on Thursday, a charity gala on Saturday. She couldn't be stuck in rural Texas for 3 or 4 days. She had a life to get back to. But as she looked at her phone, still showing no signal, and at the empty highway stretching in both directions, and at this man and his son who were the only help she had found, she realized that she didn't have much choice. She asked if there was a hotel nearby. Jake almost laughed before catching himself. The nearest hotel was in the next town, about 30 miles away. There was a motel, but it had closed down 2 years ago. Most people who passed through here were just passing through. Nobody stopped. Victoria felt panic rising in her chest. She couldn't sleep in her car. She couldn't walk 30 miles. She was completely, utterly stuck. And then Jake said something that changed everything. He said that she could stay with them. They had a spare room. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, and his wife Maria made a good dinner. He couldn't just leave her stranded on the side of the road. Victoria wanted to refuse. Every instinct she had, honed by years of protecting herself, told her to refuse. But Lucas was looking up at her with hopeful eyes, and Jake was offering the only solution that made any sense. And somewhere deep inside her, a voice whispered that maybe this was exactly what she needed. She said yes. The Morrison house was small, barely 1,000 square feet, with creaky wooden floors and windows that didn't quite seal properly. The furniture was old but well maintained, each piece telling a story of years of use and care. The couch had a patchwork quilt thrown over it to hide the worn spots. The dining table had been hand-built by Jake's grandfather, the same man who had built the house itself 60 years ago. The kitchen was tiny but spotlessly clean, with a refrigerator covered in Lucas's drawings and magnets from places the family dreamed of visiting someday. There were photographs everywhere. Lucas at various ages, from newborn to his current 4 years, Jake and Maria on their wedding day, young and hopeful, standing in front of a small church with their families behind them. Family gatherings that looked warm and genuine, with too much food and too many people crowded around tables, everyone laughing and talking at once. Nothing like the stiff, formal events Victoria attended, where people smiled for cameras and competed with each other, even as they pretended to be friends. Maria Morrison welcomed Victoria with a warmth that took her completely off guard. She was a woman in her early 30s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work, and a smile that made everyone around her feel like they mattered. She was a nurse at a clinic in the next town, working long hours for modest pay, coming home exhausted most days but still finding the energy to cook dinner and help Lucas with his learning and ask Jake about his day. She insisted on giving Victoria the best bedroom, which was really just a small room with a single bed and a wooden dresser that had seen better days. She apologized for the lack of air conditioning, explaining that the unit had broken down last summer and they were saving up to fix it. She offered homemade lemonade made from lemons she grew herself and asked about Victoria's life with a genuine curiosity that had nothing to do with her money or her fame. That first night, sitting at their small dining table eating Maria's chicken enchiladas, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt present. She wasn't checking her phone because her phone didn't work out here. She wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meetings because she couldn't do anything about them from this remote location. She wasn't performing for anyone or calculating the social dynamics or wondering what people wanted from her. She was simply there, in that moment, eating good food with kind people, and it was more satisfying than any five-star restaurant meal she had ever had. The enchiladas were made from Maria's grandmother's recipe, passed down through generations, and they tasted like love and history and everything Victoria's carefully curated life was missing. Lucas insisted on sitting next to her, showing her more of his toy cars and telling her stories about each one with the boundless enthusiasm that only children possess. This red one was fast like her car. This blue one was his favorite because his daddy had given it to him on his birthday. This yellow one was the biggest and could crush all the others if it wanted to, but it didn't because it was nice. The green one was shy and liked to hide, but it was actually very brave when it needed to be. Victoria found herself listening with genuine interest, asking questions, engaging with Lucas's imagination in a way she had never done with any child. She had never wanted children of her own, had always told herself that her career was enough, that she didn't need that kind of complication in her carefully controlled life. But sitting here with this boy, she wondered for the first time if she had been wrong. Jake came in late, having spent hours at his shop trying to source the parts for her Ferrari. He apologized for not having better news, said the parts would take at least 4 days, and asked if she was comfortable.
This story hit you, didn't it? Tap that little like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. All right, let's keep going.
His concern was genuine, without any calculation behind it, and Victoria found herself touched in a way she hadn't expected. She assured him that she was more than comfortable, and she meant it in a way that surprised her. That night, lying in the small guest room with a fan oscillating in the corner and the sounds of the Texas countryside drifting through the window, Victoria thought about her life in New York, her penthouse apartment that cost more per month than this family probably earned in a year, her closet full of designer clothes that she rarely wore twice, her calendar packed with events and meetings and obligations that left her exhausted and empty. She had everything and she had nothing. These people had almost nothing, and they had everything. 4 days became 5, then 6. The parts were delayed, there were complications with shipping, and Victoria found that she didn't mind at all. She had called her assistant from the one spot in town that got cell service, a small hill behind the general store where people gathered to make calls and check their messages, and she had postponed everything she could postpone and delegated the rest. The world hadn't ended. Sterling Cosmetics hadn't collapsed. The stock price hadn't crashed. The only person who was truly indispensable, it turned out, was no one. During those days, Victoria became part of the Morrison family in ways she never expected. She woke up early now, not because of stress or obligations, but because she wanted to. She helped Maria prepare breakfast, learning how to make proper Texas biscuits and gravy, getting flour on her designer clothes and not caring at all. She sat with Lucas while he watched cartoons, learning all the characters' names and their storylines, finding herself genuinely invested in whether the hero would save the day. She helped Maria in the kitchen, learning recipes that had been passed down through generations. Maria's grandmother had been a cook at a ranch in South Texas, and she had taught Maria's mother, who had taught Maria, and now Maria was teaching Victoria. The tamales took all day to make, a labor of love that involved the whole family, with Lucas helping to spread the masa, and Jake sneaking tastes when he thought no one was looking. Victoria had never made anything with her own hands before. She had never understood the satisfaction of creating something from nothing, of feeding people you cared about with food you had made yourself. She sat with Jake in his shop, watching him work on engines with a precision and care that was almost artistic. He explained what he was doing as he worked, not condescending to her but sharing his knowledge with genuine enthusiasm. She learned the difference between a carburetor and a fuel injector, between a timing belt and a serpentine belt. She learned that fixing things, understanding how they worked and how to make them work better, was a kind of magic that had nothing to do with money. She played with Lucas for hours, building block towers and racing toy cars and reading the same picture books over and over until she had them memorized. She learned that the best bedtime story was the one where Lucas got to be the hero, and she made up stories just for him, adventures where a brave little boy saved the world with nothing but his courage and his toy cars. She learned that Jake had given up a scholarship to a technical college to take care of his sick mother, that he had worked 3 jobs while she was dying, had held her hand at the end, had paid off her medical bills with money he couldn't afford, that Maria had dreamed of becoming a doctor, but had settled for nursing because they couldn't afford the 8 years of schooling and the crushing debt that came with it, that they were behind on their mortgage and worried about losing the house, but refused to ask for help because they had their pride and their dignity. She also learned that they were happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way that Victoria had never been, even at the height of her success. They loved each other with a quiet devotion that didn't need grand gestures or expensive gifts. They touched casually, constantly, a hand on a shoulder, a kiss on the forehead, small affirmations of connection that spoke louder than any words. They loved their son with a fierce protectiveness that made Victoria ache for something she had never had and had never known she was missing. On the 5th day, Jake's truck broke down. It was an old Ford F-150 that he had been nursing along for years, held together with duct tape and prayers and Jake's mechanical skill. But something finally gave. Something that couldn't be fixed with the tools he had. And suddenly they were stranded too. Without the truck, he couldn't get to his shop. Without his shop, they couldn't pay their bills. Victoria watched the worry settle over the family like a storm cloud, watched Jake's shoulders slump with the weight of one more problem he couldn't solve. She wanted to help. She wanted to write a check, to buy them a new truck, to pay off their mortgage, to make all their problems disappear with the wave of her financial wand. But she knew instinctively that they wouldn't accept it, that offering them charity would be an insult to everything they had built together, everything they represented. So she did something else instead. On the 7th day, the Ferrari was finally ready. Jake had worked overtime, had called in favors, had done everything he could to get Victoria back on the road. The car purred like new, better than new, because Jake had fixed issues that the previous mechanics had missed. Victoria paid him for the work, insisting on the full price despite his attempts to give her a discount. She added extra for the expedited service, for the hours he had spent on the phone tracking down parts, for the care he had taken with a car that most mechanics in his position would have treated as just another job. Then she asked if she could talk to him privately before she left. They walked to the edge of the property, where the mesquite trees gave way to open fields that stretched to the horizon, golden in the morning light. The Texas sky was enormous above them, endless blue that made Victoria feel both small and free at the same time. Victoria told Jake that she had a proposal, not charity, a business opportunity. She explained that Sterling Cosmetics was expanding into Texas, opening a new distribution center outside of Dallas. They needed fleet mechanics, people who could maintain the delivery trucks and company vehicles, people who knew how to keep things running efficiently and safely. The pay was good, the benefits were excellent, and there was room for growth. She wanted to offer Jake the position of head mechanic, with a salary that would change his family's life. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. He asked her if this was because she felt sorry for them, if this was her way of giving back for their hospitality. He needed to know that this was real, that she wasn't offering him something out of pity or obligation. Victoria shook her head. She told him the truth. She had watched him work on her car, had seen the skill and dedication he brought to everything he did. She had seen how he treated his tools, how he approached problems, how he refused to cut corners even when it would have been easier. He was exactly the kind of person she wanted in her company, the kind of person who could build something, who could be trusted, who cared about doing things right rather than doing things fast. Jake looked at his house, at his wife Maria hanging laundry in the backyard, at his son Lucas playing with toy cars in the dirt, making engine noises and racing them through the dust. He thought about all the years of struggling, all the nights of worrying about bills and mortgage payments, and whether they would make it through another month. All the dreams he had put aside because life had other plans, because someone had to be responsible, because you couldn't always get what you wanted. He said yes. 6 months later, the Morrison family had moved to a small house outside of Dallas, in a neighborhood with good schools and safe streets and neighbors who waved when they saw you. It wasn't much bigger than their old place, but it had air conditioning that worked and a roof that didn't leak, and a backyard where Lucas could play with other children. Jake was thriving at Sterling Cosmetics, already promoted once and on track for another. Maria had enrolled in nursing school to finally pursue her dream of becoming a doctor, taking classes in the evenings while Jake watched Lucas. Victoria visited them regularly, not as their benefactor, not as the rich woman who had saved them, but as a friend, as family. She brought gifts for Lucas and learned to cook tamales with Maria and talked about cars with Jake. She babysat Lucas when Jake and Maria needed a night out, something they hadn't had in years. She found in their little house something she had searched for her whole life without knowing it. She found home. A year after the Ferrari broke down on that empty stretch of highway, Victoria made another decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She stepped down as CEO of Sterling Cosmetics, handing the reins to a successor she had carefully prepared. She didn't retire exactly. She created a foundation focused on helping working families in rural communities, providing scholarships and job training and small business loans. She named it the Lucas Morrison Foundation, after the boy who had taught her that the best things in life weren't things at all. Lucas, now 6 years old, attended the foundation's launch event in a tiny suit that made everyone smile. He stood next to Victoria as she cut the ribbon, holding her hand with the same trust he had shown that first day on the highway. When asked by a reporter why the foundation was named after him, he shrugged with the simplicity of childhood. He said that his dad had fixed her car, and then she had fixed everything else. Victoria laughed, wiping away tears, and realized that the boy was exactly right. A broken-down Ferrari on a Texas highway had been the best thing that ever happened to her. It had forced her to stop, to see, to connect with people who didn't care about her money or her fame, who only saw her as a person who needed help. She thought about all the years she had spent accumulating wealth and success, convinced that if she just achieved enough, acquired enough, controlled enough, she would finally feel complete. And she thought about the week she had spent in a tiny house with a family that had almost nothing, and how those 7 days had filled her in ways that $400 million never could. The Ferrari was still in her garage, fully restored, gleaming under its dust cover. She rarely drove it anymore. She preferred her new car, a practical SUV that could handle rural roads and carry supplies for the foundation's events. But she kept the Ferrari as a reminder of the day everything changed, of the smoke rising from the engine like a signal, of a small boy pointing at the wreckage with absolute confidence. My dad can fix it. And he had. Not just the car. He had helped fix something in Victoria that she hadn't even known was broken. The Morrison family had shown her what mattered, what lasted, what actually made a life worth living. Sometimes, Victoria thought, the universe breaks you down exactly when and where you need to be broken. It strands you on a highway in the middle of nowhere so that you can find the somewhere you were always meant to be. And sometimes, a 4-year-old boy in a striped shirt knows more about what really matters than a billionaire in a Ferrari ever could. If this story made you believe that sometimes the greatest help comes from the most unexpected places, leave a little heart below to let me know. And if you stayed until the very end, it means these stories speak to something true in you. For those who wish to support these stories, there's an option to leave a heartfelt thanks through the feature below. Every gesture counts, just like Jake's gesture of kindness counted more than anyone could have predicted. Because you chose to stay until the final word, and that makes you part of this story.